Both the Illinois House and Senate back at work, but didn't get them any closer to a budget deal with the governor. Plus, a deal with world leaders and Iran, all but done. Now the question remains, will it get the seal of approval from Congress? And former Congressman Aaron Schock racking up the legal bills. A look at how much his defense is costing him.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Good morning and welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. It's been 3 weeks of overtime session and the state of Illinois doesn't have a budget. The deadline to reach a deal was June 30th. When that passed, lawmakers left for the 4th of July holiday without nailing down a spending plan. The House went back to work on July 8th, the Senate July 14th. The following day, state employees got paid. But what happens the next time paychecks are set to go out? During their session last week, the Illinois Senate passed a one-month temporary budget. The $2.3 billion spending plan covers what lawmakers call essential services. It passed 39-0, but don't let that fool you. 15 Republican senators voted present. The bill headed to the governor, who has made it clear he's not going to sign it. It's leaving many to wonder why lawmakers aren't working around the clock to get a deal done.
House is in continuous session.
But, you know, when you say that, people assume that you're going to be here tomorrow, but you're not.
The House is in continuous session. We've been here every week since the end of May.
Governor Rauner has already vetoed a $36 billion Democratic budget because he said it wasn't balanced. It was nearly $4 billion short. The two sides differ on how to balance that budget. Democrats want a mix of cuts and new revenue. The governor says a tax increase is not necessary. Shifting gears now, another Republican is running for president. We started off the week with Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker throwing his hat into the ring. He made the announcement Monday in Waukesha, wasting no time making his thoughts known on a variety of issues, telling supporters he backs a, quote, all-of-the-above energy policy. He also says if elected president, one of his top priorities will be to take a hard look at that Iran nuclear deal.
We need to terminate that deal on the very first day in office, put in place crippling economic sanctions on Iran, and convince our allies to do exactly the same thing.
Walker's firm stance on Iran is likely to help him among conservative voters as he enters that crowded primary field. He's the 15th Republican presidential hopeful to declare candidacy. Former Congressman Aaron Schock is spending a lot of money on lawyers, nearly $2 million. Now, according to financial disclosures filed with the Federal Election Commission, Schock has spent more than $1 million on legal fees at 8 firms across 3 states, as well as the District of Columbia. Now, he also owes nearly $750,000 to Washington, D.C.-based law firm Jones Day. Schock has refunded more than $57,000 to campaign donors. Now, despite all his spending, his campaign still had more than $2.1 million cash on hand at the end of June. Schock continues to be investigated by a grand jury in Springfield for questionable spending practices. World leaders strike a deal with Iran over nuclear weapons. We're talking with an expert about what it means for the U.S. and everyone here in Central Illinois. And who will get top billing on the ballot in September? A look at how that decision will be made. President Obama spent much of his week trying to get lawmakers and you, the American people, to buy into the Iran nuclear deal. He made his case at a White House press conference, but as Emily Schmidt reports, critics say the president is selling a bad deal.
The international nuclear deal with Iran has President Obama praising diplomacy.
Iran will not be in a position to develop a nuclear bomb.
While playing political defense.
I am not betting on the Republican Party rallying behind this agreement.
There's a reason, even as the first national security briefings begin on the nuclear agreement with Iran, even as Vice President Joe Biden heads to Capitol Hill to rally support.
I'm confident they'll like it when they understand it.
Many Republicans criticize a deal they say does too much to help Iran by lifting economic sanctions without getting enough oversight in return.
They're the ones that are out celebrating right now because they got everything and basically we got nothing.
But President Obama says walking away from the deal, which most countries support, would unravel any sanctions. Congress has 60 days to review the deal and vote whether to approve it. President Obama vows to veto any negative actions, so Republicans would need some Democrats on their side to get the two-thirds vote needed to override the veto.
Yes, I've reviewed the entire deal, and unfortunately it's not as bad as I had feared. It's actually much worse.
If we don't choose wisely, I believe future generations will judge us harshly for letting this moment slip away.
President Obama says it's possible Iran could try to cheat and make a nuclear bomb. But he says sanctions can always resume, while diplomacy may be more difficult if Iran finds a way to build a bomb without a deal. In Washington, I'm Emily Schmidt.
All right, joining me now to talk about that deal and what's next, Illinois State University professor Dr. Ali Riaz. Now, earlier this week, you told WMBD that this was a good first step. What do you mean by that?
I mean, this is a good first step because there are other issues. But insofar as the nuclear issue is concerned and practically limiting the capacity of Iran to produce nuclear weapon, this is the best that you can get out of in this current circumstances. That's why I think the other options, those are on the table, are far less better, let me put it this way, than what we have currently with this deal.
In that last piece, you heard a lot of extreme rhetoric coming from particularly Republicans about this deal. They don't like it, but again, now the deal is there, and it's going to be very difficult for the House and the Senate in Washington to reject it.
Absolutely. More importantly, look at what are the other options. What are the other alternatives? Two other alternatives that we can think of at this point. One was to continue pushing Iran. And the sanction regime, which is in place since 2006, and the Europeans are on board, the Asians are on board, but how long that can continue? I was afraid that, and I am still afraid, if this deal doesn't get implemented, the sanction regime may fall apart, because a lot of these countries might walk out and say, okay, that's it, we have tried, and then that means Iran is having the capacity, and there is no sanction, and they have the money and everything. The second option is the war. And we have the experience of how war goes, and that's not the best option in any circumstances. So given the alternatives, I think this is the best that you can get out. It is not the best, it is not the end of it. I don't think this is there's any other way that if we could get any other way to the point, that would have been better. But today, this is what we can get best out of this situation.
Now, we know that in the Middle East, Israel and Saudi Arabia don't like the deal, and one of the most vocal critics is obviously Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and so he is really kind of a big mouthpiece, too, for the Republican Party in the United States.
That's true, but in the long run, it is good for Israel. In my understanding, it is in long run, because a stable Middle East is better for the state of Israel. We understand this is not a solution, it's not a comprehensive solution, it is only about the nuclear weapon, but this should be a step towards having a stable region. But there are other issues. Of course, the Palestinian issue is there. Without a viable, independent Palestinian state, a two-state solution, there cannot be a peace in the Middle East. And also we need to look into other issues. Yemen is a case in point, Syrian situation, Islamic State is there. All these issues need to be addressed. So there are other things, but at this point, having a deal with Iran, which would limit the capability of Iran to produce nuclear weapon, should be welcomed by Israel from a long-term perspective.
All right, very quickly, because we just have a couple seconds left. Do the American people support this deal, particularly if and when gas prices drop below $2 a gallon?
I don't know whether it would go down $2, but definitely bringing in Iran into the global market would help reducing the price of oil, and which would benefit you and I. And of course, there would be more investment in Iran, hopefully, in coming, if not months, in coming years. That should benefit the job market here as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ali Riaz from
Thank you.
Illinois State University. The On the Record panel is up next, and we're going to take a deep dive into the battle to balance the budget in Springfield. Stay with us. Welcome back. Joining the panel this week from Peoria Public Radio, Alex Rusciano, and from WJBC Radio, News Director Terry James. All right, guys, another week, no budget. It doesn't seem like a compromise is in sight, and the sides seem so far apart. Terry, have you seen any budget battles play out like this?
No, not this badly. And the problem is we could rewind to January and we would be in the exact same place. And the problem that I keep seeing is we hear about we need to pay the state workers. Well, the problem is you already have organizations such as Life CIL in Bloomington. They've had to fire 2 workers because of worries about state grant money coming in. When is the worry going to be about the disabled, the elderly, and the poor instead of whether or not our state workers are going to get a paycheck on Friday?
Now, Alex, we look at some of the proposals that the Democrats have put forward, and they say that hey, these are part of the governor's turnaround agenda because they are about things like workers' compensation and tort reform and whatnot, but they don't get any Republican support.
Absolutely, and that's something that in reporting in the Central Illinois region, we've heard from many different sources that funding is looming, it is uncertain, and the real challenge going forward is, and one of the main messages that you hear from different people that you interview, different groups, organizations, is no matter what happens, both sides of the aisle need to come together. They both need to kind of galvanize and just get something passed. And to touch on a point you raised earlier with the temporary budget, that only lasts for a month. And so people are wanting a long-term solution to this.
Would it seem to be in the governor's best interest to do something in the short term because they don't seem to be able to move forward. And you see the governor as a businessman who wants to get behind closed doors and do that, but you have a very savvy veteran politician in Michael Madigan who is clearly willing to play the game.
What I'm hearing from my listeners is get to work. I mean, don't kick the can down the road. The problem is that we're seeing, let's do a 1-month solution, and then maybe we'll figure it out. Listen, guys, you've been fighting for 6 months or more about this. It's time to pop the ego balloon and start dealing with real work. If I go to my job and don't do my work, I don't get a 1-month extension.
But on that 1-month extension, we've seen that in Congress all the time with several bills, but particularly funding plans. I mean, is this just a microcosm of the problem with politics?
Well, and that's a great question, Paul, because one of the things that we hear from organizations all the time is that they don't plan their budgets on 1-month cycles. And one organization that we were speaking with in the region that serves people with developmental disabilities, one of the officials there was saying, look, even if funding gets restored, even if tomorrow there's funding, because of a backlog of payments and because it takes a while, there's going to be staff reductions anyway, and there's going to be some kind of negative consequences to this. So really, people are saying, as was just mentioned, get to work on both sides of the aisle for this.
What do you think it's going to take to actually get a deal? Because it doesn't seem clear that they have any common ground on which to stand.
Personal stories. We have politicians in Springfield who don't know what it's like to have a homemaker come in to bathe you, to feed you, to help you do your laundry. When we get to the point where those folks we're no longer paying for homemakers to come in, they're going to the nursing home, and then taxpayers are paying $5,000 a month for that. That's going to hit hard, and the personal stories are going to finally have to hit the people in Springfield, and they're going to have to say, time to make something happen.
We heard a fascinating story actually on Peoria Public Radio about a family with a technology-dependent child, and how much money it costs to give them treatment at home, but how much more it would cost if that treatment had to be shifted to the hospital.
Absolutely. This couple that you're referring to from East Peoria, they rely on, just like many different individuals and organizations, on either Medicaid reimbursement rates or state payments that are dependent on, refilling that monthly amount for them. And that is one of the common themes, is it may cost a certain amount of money for this program to provide service at home for a technology-dependent child. But they're saying that if you go to the hospital, that will be thousands and thousands of dollars more in addition. So it actually costs more with no long-term budget funding as opposed to just a short-term solution.
It seems like that could be something that would be motivating, knowing that, we're trying to cut the budget, we're trying to save money. But ultimately, by not instituting a new budget, it's going to cost the state more in the long run.
Paul, what we're seeing over and over again is when you talk to a Republican lawmaker, they will say, well, we've come up with this plan, the Democrats won't budge. When you talk to a Democratic lawmaker, they say, hey, we've got a plan, the Republicans won't budge. It's time to come together and say, we need to compromise. Let's send a kindergarten teacher to Springfield and teach them some of the basics of working together.
One of the other things that's obviously happened this year, severe weather. We've seen a couple tornadoes in central Illinois over just late last week, and up farther north in the state earlier this year. Do you think some of this emergency response, you're going to start stretching resources across the state when it comes to responding to emergencies? Is this maybe an issue where lawmakers can come together and realize, hey, we've got to have money in place to do some of these things? We think of emergency services being funded well and funded often, but it's going to be an issue. If you run out of money, you run out of money.
We're incredibly lucky in central Illinois. We have very big fire departments, police departments. When you go down to poorer areas of the state, you're already seeing that. You're already seeing budget cuts. Volunteer departments, you're seeing less people moving forward. And when the state starts having money problems, public service, public safety may be getting cut.
What about your take on that? Is this an issue where they maybe can find some common ground and say, hey, we need to take some action? Because it seemed FEMA at one point was able to kind of unite lawmakers in Washington and realize that maybe that was the kick in the pants that they needed.
That's actually a very good question because, for instance, when the bad weather in 2013 hit in Washington, Illinois, there was a horrible tornado that tore through the area, and that was one of the things that we saw was lawmakers coming together because on the federal level, FEMA eventually denied funding. And then the state stepped in and provided some emergency relief on the state level after FEMA on the federal level, because of formula changes and things like that, turned that funding down. So it certainly is within the realm of possibility, and as has been kind of the common theme in this discussion, I think that the message that a lot of people say is just no matter what, just try and get results when you can.
All right, well, we're going to have both of you guys come back in the near future and maybe pick up this discussion, or maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about something else if they reach a budget deal. Terry James from WJBC Radio, Alex Rusciano from Peoria Public Radio, thank you guys very much for joining us.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
All right, the lottery is coming to Illinois' 18th Congressional District. I'll explain what that means when we come back. All right, who will be listed first on the September 10th special election ballot? Well, that decision will be left to the luck of the draw. Topping our look ahead, the McLean and Peoria County clerks will be holding lotteries to decide the ballot position for Republican Darren LaHood and Democrat Rob Mellon. Those lotteries basically just pull a name out of a hat. The person whose name is pulled first will go first on the ballot. McLean County officials will hold their lottery Monday at 10 a.m. Peoria County will hold its lottery Thursday at 9 in the morning. For 6 weeks now, lawmakers have been unable to reach a deal to fund state government. Members of the House are due back in Springfield on Tuesday. The Senate hasn't scheduled its next meeting, and they're not expected to return before the 27th of July. Senators hope to pass a bill on a property tax freeze, a key policy item for the governor's turnaround agenda. The Democrat-sponsored bill would have frozen property taxes for 2 years. It failed, getting no support from Republicans. Scott Walker is hoping to be one of the candidates taking part in the first Republican presidential debate. It's set for Thursday, August 6th. Fox News is hosting the debate and raising some eyebrows with the rules. Only the top 10 candidates can take part, and as we mentioned, there are 15 people in that race. Fox will use an average of 5 polls to pick the top candidates. Now, some of the candidates say the rules are not fair because everyone should get a chance to take part. And in case you missed it, Donald Trump was actually leading in a poll released last week. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Central Illinois on the Record. Before we wrap things up, just want to send our thoughts and prayers out to the families and those affected in Delavan and Cameron after the tornadoes. Of course, Governor Rauner had issued a state of emergency in those communities to help with state resources, so our thoughts will be with them as they continue the cleanup and recovery process. Of course, you can always stay in touch with us using social media. Connect with me and WMBD on Facebook and Twitter. You can use the hashtag CIOTR. We'll see you right back here next week. Thanks for watching.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WIZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.